August of 1972, 16-year-old Jeanette De Palma disappeared from her home in Springfield Township, New Jersey. She was last seen on August 7th, hitchhiking near her house after reportedly missing a bus. When she didn't return home, her family began searching, but days passed with no sign of her. 6 weeks later, on September 19th, Jeanette's remains were discovered in a wooded ravine near Hudile Quarry, an isolated area not far from her neighborhood. Her body was found partially decomposed, lying face down on the forest floor. The location was difficult to access and not somewhere people typically traveled through, raising immediate questions about how she ended up there. An autopsy was performed, but due to the advanced state of decomposition, the official cause of death could not be determined. Investigators were unable to confirm whether she had been murdered, overdosed, or died of natural causes. No definitive signs of trauma could be established. Her death was ultimately classified as undetermined. What turned Jeanette De Palma's case into a lasting mystery were the rumors that followed. Reports circulated that her body had been found surrounded by wooden crosses, sticks, or symbols, sparking claims of occult involvement. These details spread quickly through newspapers and local gossip, transforming the case into something darker in the public imagination. However, decades later, officials and family members have pushed back against those claims. Former investigators stated that no evidence of satanic or ritualistic activity was ever confirmed at the scene. Jeanette's family has also strongly rejected the occult narrative, saying it distracted from the real tragedy and from finding the truth about what happened to her. Despite renewed interest in the case years later, including reviews by county prosecutors, no suspects were ever charged and no definitive explanation was reached. Jeanette De Palma's death remains unsolved, not because of a lack of theories, but because of a lack of answers. More than 50 years later, her case is still remembered, not just for its mystery, but for how quickly rumor can overshadow fact, leaving a family without closure and a question that has never been resolved. In December of 1934, a young man checked into the President Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri, under the name Roland T. Owen. He appeared quiet, well-dressed, and nervous. He requested a room on an upper floor and paid in cash. At the time, nothing about him stood out, just another guest passing through during the Great Depression. That room was 1046. Over the next several days, hotel staff began noticing strange behavior. Owen rarely left the room. He received multiple phone calls, but made almost none himself. When a hotel operator connected a call to his room, she later reported hearing a man's voice angrily arguing with Owen on the other end of the line. On the morning of January 2nd, 1935, a hotel maid entered room 1046 to clean. The room was completely dark. The curtains were closed, and Owen lay on the bed. When she spoke to him, he weakly replied that he was sick and waiting for a friend named Don. He specifically asked her not to turn on the lights. The maid noticed bruises on his face and blood on the sheets and immediately reported it. Later that afternoon, hotel guests complained of loud noises and shouting coming from room 1046. One witness reported hearing a male voice yelling angrily, followed by silence. When hotel staff checked again, Owen was found severely injured. He had been beaten, stabbed in the chest, and strangled with a cord. His skull was fractured. The hotel telephone had been ripped from the wall, and towels, linens, and personal items were missing. Despite the violence, there were no signs of forced entry. Owen was rushed to the hospital, barely conscious. Police questioned him as doctors worked to save his life. When asked who attacked him, Owen whispered only one name: Don. He refused, or was unable, to provide any other details. Shortly after, he died. As investigators dug deeper, the case became even more unsettling. Roland T. Owen was not his real name. Fingerprints later identified him as Artemus Ogletree, a 19-year-old from Alabama. His family was shocked. They had no idea why he was in Kansas City or who he might have been meeting. Letters later surfaced suggesting Ogletree had been frightened and possibly under the influence of someone he trusted. One letter mentioned fear of a man named Don, but no full identity was ever confirmed. Police interviewed dozens of people, including possible associates and hotel employees, but every lead went cold. No weapon was ever found. No suspect was arrested. The mysterious Don was never identified. To this day, room 1046 remains unsolved. A case involving false identities, missing evidence, and a young man who died without telling anyone why he was there, or who he was really afraid of, Nearly 90 years later, the door to room 1046 has long since closed, but the mystery inside it never has. In late March of 1922, on a remote farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck, just outside Munich, Germany, an entire family was murdered in one of the most disturbing unsolved crimes in European history. The victims were Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, Victoria's 7-year-old daughter Cecilia, and her 2-year-old son Josef. Also killed was the family's new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had arrived at the farm just hours before the murders. What makes the case especially unsettling is that strange things were happening at the farm days before anyone died. Andreas Gruber told neighbors he had found footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the house, but none leading away. He reported hearing footsteps in the attic, yet found no one there. A set of keys went missing. A newspaper appeared on the property that no one in the household subscribed to. Despite these warnings, no one left the farm or contacted authorities. On the night of March 31st, 1922, someone lured members of the family, one by one, into the barn. There they were attacked with a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe. Andreas, his wife, Victoria, and young Cecilia were killed in the barn. Evidence later suggested that at least one of them survived the initial attack briefly, pulling at their own hair in agony. Afterward, the killer went into the house. The maid, Maria, and the toddler, Joseph, were murdered in their beds. Joseph had not been taken to the barn, suggesting the killer either spared him initially or targeted him last. The bodies were not discovered for 4 days. When neighbors finally went to investigate on April 4th, they found something chilling. The farm animals had been fed, and smoke had recently come from the chimney. This suggested that someone remained on the property after the murders, possibly for days. During the investigation, more disturbing details emerged. Food had been eaten. Beds appeared slept in. Nothing of value was stolen. The murder weapon was later found hidden on the property. Police interviewed over 100 suspects, including neighbors, former employees, and even Victoria's husband, who had supposedly died years earlier in World War I. No one was ever charged. Over the decades, theories ranged from robbery to revenge to an intruder secretly living in the attic. Modern investigators reviewing the case files believe the killer was likely someone familiar with the farm and the family. But the truth was never proven. To this day, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved. Not just because the killer was never identified, but because whoever committed the crime may have watched the family beforehand and lived among the bodies afterward. Nearly a century later, the farm no longer stands. But what happened there still haunts Germany's criminal history, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying crimes are the ones that leave no answers behind. In the spring of 1946, the quiet border town of Texarkana, split between Texas and Arkansas, was gripped by fear. Over the course of 10 weeks, an unidentified attacker, later dubbed the Phantom Killer, carried out a series of violent nighttime assaults that left 5 people dead and the community terrified. The attacks began on February 22nd, 1946. A young couple, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larey, were parked in a secluded area known locally as Lover's Lane. A masked man approached their car, shining a flashlight into the window. He ordered them out at gunpoint. Both were beaten, and Hollis was shot. Miraculously, both survived, but their descriptions of the attacker were vague and inconsistent. Just over a month later, on March 24th, the violence escalated. Another couple, Richard Griffin and Pollyann Moore, were found dead in Griffin's car on a rural road. Griffin had been shot in the back of the head. Moore was shot and left outside the vehicle. This time, there were no survivors. On April 13th, the killer struck again, this time targeting a couple inside their own home. Virgil and Katie Starks were attacked just after midnight. Virgil was shot and killed, and Katie was shot twice in the face, but survived. She later described seeing a man flee the scene, wearing what appeared to be a mask with holes cut for the eyes. By this point, panic had spread across Texarkana. Residents armed themselves, barred their doors, and avoided going out after dark. Gun and lock sales skyrocketed. Police from multiple jurisdictions were involved, but coordination was difficult, and forensic technology at the time was limited. Despite patrols and curfews, the phantom killer was never caught. Witness descriptions varied widely. Some believed the attacker used multiple weapons. Others suggested he knew the area well. There was no clear motive, no robbery, no clear pattern beyond attacking couples, often at night. More than 400 suspects were questioned. One man, Yul Bryan, was widely suspected, but never charged due to lack of evidence. Another suspect died by suicide, further complicating the investigation. None were conclusively linked to the crimes. After May 3rd, 1946, the attack suddenly stopped. The killer vanished as mysteriously as he appeared. The case officially remains unsolved, and the phantom killer's identity was never confirmed. The murders left a permanent scar on Texarkana, not just because of the brutality, but because the attacker was never brought to justice. Decades later, the crimes inspired books, documentaries, and even the film The Town That Dreaded Sundown. But for the families of the victims, the story was never entertainment. It was a reminder that fear once walked their streets and disappeared without a trace. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders remain one of America's most chilling, unsolved serial crime cases. Proof that sometimes, even when an entire town is watching, a killer can still slip away into the dark.